What's up, guys and gals of the movement world? Sean Mushka, football beyond the stats, in our movement play of the week for week 14 of the 2021 National Football League season. And this week, as is typically the case as we head down the stretch, when we really think about how players are able to test their movement problem solving capabilities, to put their skill to the test, if we were to use Bernstein's idea of dexterity, to be able to solve any emerging movement problem in any situation, but more importantly, or as importantly, rather, in any condition. Those conditions are really about pressure and anxiety and fatigue. And as the season carries on, the skill expression becomes that much more impressive. Those performers that are able to behave when the lights are brightest are those who obviously typically display higher levels of expressed dexterity. What the play that we're going to break down today, like I said, has a number of different nuances to it, a number of different layers here, and there's going to be some levels to this. We're probably going to go a little long rather than we go in a little shorter. But our recipient this week is Baltimore Ravens backup quarterback Tyler Huntley. Now, a few things here, obviously, when we look at the constraints that we're coalescing and how those constraints might have channeled the emerging movement behavior that we see from Huntley. I want to point a few things out first and foremost. Those of you who didn't see the game probably already can recognize that our 2019 mover of the year, Lamar Jackson, got knocked out of the game a little bit earlier, hence the reason his backup quarterback, Tyler Huntley, is in the game at this time. Bunch of different constraints here at play. Kind of a division, not kind of a division rivalry, a division rival. Baltimore Ravens versus Cleveland Browns in Cleveland. And Cleveland is already well ahead at this point, 24-6. Huntley comes in as the backup quarterback. Obviously, the odds are stacked against him. The odds are never in a backup quarterback's favor. Obviously, there's a bunch of different things at play there. Practice constraints, very few reps to go around. Obviously, when you are in practice, you're not really getting the same type of work as you typically would get if you're the starter, both in regards to what you're going to see, but also kind of having this opportunity to really be calibrated to what the world is offering you in the affordances at play. So, backup quarterbacks always behind the eight ball, and for them to step in and step in under these circumstances, again, an 8-4 Baltimore Ravens team versus a 6-6 kind of coming on Cleveland Browns team, a bunch of different pressure and anxiety constraints here at play. Tyler Huntley, second year man out of Utah, actually was an undrafted free agent in 2020, so this is only a second year. Last year having played only 2 games, and it was just like mop up time for Lamar Jackson. This year, he's getting a little bit more time, a little bit more exposure, because Lamar Jackson has gotten beat up a bit, not only within this game, but it happened earlier in the season as well. So I don't know what their plan will be heading forward as far as what the significance or magnitude of Lamar Jackson's ankle injury is. But what we're finding with Tyler Huntley, as you sort of see with the highlight heavens here, when we get into the next video, because I'm going to use 2 videos today, this one to walk us through at full speed, and then we'll switch over into highlight heavens video simply because it gives us an opportunity, because it's on YouTube, to be able to walk through at 50% speed, which you guys know that I believe and feel is important for us to really try to be able to tell this movement problem solving story, get within the human movement system of the respective player and performer. A few additional things here. If you were to really watch Lamar Jackson and you were then to watch Tyler Huntley, I don't like playing the comparison game because I believe in authenticity and individuality within one's style, within one's skill. But if you were somebody who really didn't know that Lamar Jackson was out of the game and he put on an 8 jersey instead of wearing the number 2, I think there would be some people that maybe wouldn't be able to tell that big of a difference as we maybe would look at or see on paper. Tyler Huntley being 6'1", 196 pounds is what they have him listed in. Lamar Jackson being 6'2", 212 pounds. I think that's very generous, by the way, that 212 pounds, because I don't believe he's currently that heavy. And I'm not trying to insinuate that they are equals with one another, because I think there's going to be some things that we're going to see even in this exceptional play on affordances that were either perceived and selected, or perceived and rejected in certain ways from Huntley that we wouldn't have seen from Lamar Jackson. Always going to be an authentic touch there to the movement problems in the way that they're solved. We also have to think sort of about the organismic, the individual constraints here at play. Tyler Huntley, even though you're going to not really be able to see too big of a difference between them on this respective play based on this movement problem and its disposition and how it's speaking to Huntley and what it's asking of him, I think we have to kind of call out the elephant in the room here. As I mentioned in 2019 in our Mover of the Year analysis of Lamar Jackson, we're talking about one of one. I mean, one of one, not only currently in the league, but one of one ever. And a lot of that comes from just his own unique skill set, Lamar, that is. But we also have to think about their experiences, their exposures, and what they've been exposed to, how it is that they've been not only expected to solve problems, but how it is that they have functionally solved problems in the past. Just to kind of highlight this, to show the impressiveness of that, which what Tyler Huntley did. I want you guys to think about this for a moment. Tyler Huntley played 4 years at Utah. He didn't run the ball all that much. And you would think, as an undrafted free agent and somebody that they're bringing in, that the Ravens are bringing in, you would think that they'd be trying to bring somebody in who has a lot of exposure and experience into running the football from the quarterback position. Unfortunately, he really didn't. In fact, he averaged less than 3 yards per carry across the entirety of his career at Utah. In 4 years, ran 1,146 yards accumulated. In contrast, let's think about Lamar Jackson here. Okay. Lamar Jackson in 3 years at Louisville, including Heisman winning year, as well as I think he was third, maybe second runner up or something like that in the Heisman in 1 year, 4,132 yards. So 4,132 yards in 3 years versus 1,146 yards in 4 years. Lamar Jackson being good for 6.3 yards per carry across his career in 50 rushing touchdowns. So if you just think about this comparison, think about the problems that these respective performers interacted with while they were developing, while they were acquiring that skill, and while they were learning ways to adapt. Significantly different experience here. And again, remember, Tyler Huntley is a backup quarterback in the NFL. Typically, when he's running in practice, he's wearing a red jersey. Guys can't hit him. So his experience and his exposure at this level is very, very, very little. I thought I had actually written down what he has done over the course of this year so far. I actually did. So far, he's already rushed the ball 26 times for 145 yards, which is 11 yards per carry. Now, I know this is football beyond the stats, but that stat is actually begins to tell us a little bit something here. Even in just 4 games of action, 145 yards and nearly 11 yards per carry. So obviously, what we're finding here is Tyler Huntley may actually be kind of a poor man's, well, a backup Lamar Jackson here. There is something that I want you guys to think about here. Are we seeing that Tyler Huntley kind of observationally learned his way into behaving like Lamar Jackson? That's a question that none of us are really going to be able to answer. But based on what I informed you of from his time at Utah and his very, very little experience so far in the National Football League, do we think that Tyler Huntley could be learning from, absorbing certain stylistic, nuanced nature of skill that Lamar Jackson displays and expresses? Again, it's a question we don't necessarily have a firm answer to, but I think we should speculate around. So let's get into the play here. First, we're going to watch it. We're going to watch it here on the Baltimore Ravens site first and foremost, and we're going to click over to Highlight Heavens. So this will be at 100% speed. So for those of you who haven't seen it yet, and again, you're finding if you put an 8 on this guy, we might not be able to see too much of a difference. Ugh. Okay, I knew I told you we were going to go through it, but we got to see this. Watch this. Whew. And then, of course, we're going to see it from a little different view. We're not going to have this second view when we go over to highlight heaven. So I want you guys to pay close attention here. Let me go back to the beginning of the play, and then we'll watch it in its entirety all the way through again. Again, at 100% speed, we'll see the 50% speed when we go over to YouTube. And as you could probably guess and imagine, and then he gets the PI on there as well, or excuse me, the unnecessary roughness penalty and flag on there as well at the tail end of that play. Myles Garrett, obviously one of the best currently doing it, chasing him around, presenting some threat. Jadeveon Clowney, former #1 pick, who we've done a movement analysis on, and that move, guys and gals, as you guys, I don't think I have to tell you, is a nasty one. Let's go over, obviously, here now to 50% speed. And we're going to see it from Highlight Heavens. Our guys over at Highlight Heavens, I don't actually technically know them. I just use them on a number of different cases. I think as I draw attention to what they have written on the top here, Tyler Huntley is clearly learning from Lamar Jackson. Now, I typically kind of scoff at what people write as headlines or highlights, sort of like as we saw with the Baltimore Ravens, where they talked about Tyler Huntley weaving through and dancing around, evading essentially the entire Cleveland Browns defense. Now, that's accurate, of course, but sometimes we see people say certain things on these titles that doesn't seem to be that apropos. But in this case, I believe that there is something to this. Again, that's why I drew everyone's attention to it a little earlier, that I believe Tyler Huntley could be learning on some of the perceptions and decision making and the action organization of the unique skill set of Lamar Jackson. A few things here that I haven't mentioned from a constraint standpoint, specifically the environmental constraints. We've already sort of talked about this being in Cleveland in December. The weather isn't all that bad. Obviously, no issues here from an environmental constraint standpoint. But what we do see is the social cultural constraints of the division rivalry, of the pressure, of the anxiety, late December, mid-December, late season football. The score already being 24-6. 5 minutes ago in the third, the down and distance sort of sets up the platform of this movement skill to emerge to a certain degree. Again, I don't like comparing players, but we see a sort of like there's not that much expectation for a backup quarterback coming in. He can sort of have this frame of mind that he just has to survive. He just has to make something out of nothing. And there's very little expectation or pressure there, which I believe that can be less constraining in certain ways, that we would not necessarily go in this constrained action where degrees of freedom actually become constrained or fixed or frozen. Again, whether we're perceptual, whether we're cognitive, or whether more and more mechanical or motor system degrees of freedom there. When a guy sort of has the ability to just sort of like take the reins off and just go behave, just go make something happen, that can be pretty freeing in some ways, especially when we're talking about the world's best compensators and the world's best adapters. Obviously, here as we start the play, again, we should be at 50%. We are. Again, I think if we had a number 8 on this guy, a lot of people, we see some of these angles, we see some of the dynamics of this action organization, specifically early on here, as he's looking to always be in pass mode, really until he's not. You know, even here, we can see that he is still looking. If we get our arrows out, you know, you guys know I like my arrows. Okay. If we even think about where he's potentially looking, obviously up to this point, we can see how he's holding the ball, his intentions, as well as what he potentially is attuning to and adapting around, is still oriented around throwing the football here. And that kind of tells us a little bit about why it is that skill may have unfolded or was expressed and emerged in the way that it was. Again, right here, he's in this frame of mind where he's ready to throw. until he's not. He's ready to throw until the threat and the challenges of doing so have gotten so reduced that it has become channeled into this place where he just has to make something out of nothing. It is 2nd and 20. And a lot of times, backup quarterbacks feel as though they got to pick it all up in one lump chunk until, again, he decides that he doesn't need to. Oops. Let me get back here. I got to get my mouse back on. Okay. So now we even look at this moment. Okay. I want you to think about this. And all I know, I didn't have us off for very long. I want you to look at this right here. Okay. Obviously, you can see the gap, the second line that I drew there with the 2 arrows. This is a wide gap. And if he really was in the mindset of running the football here, even with where his perceptual gaze is fixated and what he is potentially tuning to, you can tell already he's still in pass mode, right? Because otherwise, this gap is pretty inviting for most guys that sort of have that playmaker mode or zone on. But for Huntley right here, he's still in pass mode, okay? You could see he even thinks about potentially accepting it, maybe throwing the ball. We could see how the ball's held in his hand here currently, and he elects not to go through it. Again, even though this is Jadeveon Clowney right here, if you can see my mouse, number 90 for the Cleveland Browns on or interacting with number 70, and he's actually got a double team. So Huntley could have accepted that affordance, but he clearly rejects it. Okay. So he, at this moment, at some point, has to go from I'm still going to pass the ball to now I'm going to run it. That was like just by the nick of his chinny chin chin, right? This is Myles Garrett here, guys and gals. Like, this is no joke. This is a creature of nature. Maybe one of the best, if not the best, edge rusher currently doing it in the game. Certainly one of the scariest. And he just barely misses Huntley. But right now, I want you to think about this, and you guys probably could have guessed that I was going to go kind of slow frame by frame here because there's a lot of things happening. I want you to think about what Huntley, once they get out of this interaction, there is a lot of space out here, okay? But we have to think about all the constraints. So when I say a lot of space out here, I mean this, okay? He's on the hashes right now. With one guy to beat, essentially. Again, we can't necessarily see what's happening back here, back behind the 20, because of our view. And he being Huntley, may be looking there. But if we were to take our spotlight and go right here on Jadeveon Clowney, again, kind of a freak at the position, specifically when we're talking about being able to close space and close gaps in a hurry. Huntley, one-on-one, he start moving from left to right here, misses that gap or elects not to take that gap. He's now in this 1v1 advantageous situation. Okay. There's 4 yards, clearly 4 yards separating them. So this interpersonal distance here, along with this interpersonal distance, not interpersonal distance, that gap and that space out there that again is inviting him, all those things coalesce to form these informational constraints, which will potentially channel the movement behavior in some way, shape, or form. That's a lot of space to the boundaries there, guys and gals. And so we have to think about action capabilities. Remember, we perceive to act, act to perceive. So our ability to act upon this in a given way is channeling how we may aim to interact. Okay. At this moment, I would be of the belief that Huntley we can sort of see where he's looking. Okay. He's looking to that gap. So there may, in fact, be somebody out here that he's also paying attention to, but he knows that this threat presented by Clowney is not a small one. Okay. Because again, 1v1 in the open field like this with an edge rusher, most edge rushers, the more athletically gifted, skilled players, whether it's running back, wide receiver, or in this case, running quarterback or athletic quarterback, are going to accept this gap. In fact, if this were Lamar Jackson, he's hitting that sideline. Okay. He's hitting that gas pedal. He's hitting it early and he's hitting it hard, and he's staying on it. Okay. So as this unfolds, let me get our drawings off the board here. As this unfolds, I believe there's a few things that are happening. I believe that as you're going to watch it play out, Huntley is perceiving and sensitive to, he's attuned to Clowney's bearing angle. So the angles in relation to one another between number 2 and number 90, between Huntley and Clowney, he's sensitive to, again, whether it's conscious or I would argue probably more unconscious from a mechanism standpoint, relative velocities between the two, and you're going to see that factor in. You're also going to see postural and body kinematics from Clowney factor into this as well. So watch this as it unfolds. We'll see it a few times through. Okay. Again, right here, he has to be sensitive in one way, shape, or form, perceptually picking up bearing angle. Okay. Where is this guy going? Where's this guy going in relation to myself if I'm Huntley? Okay. How are those going to interact with each other? I apologize for the dog barking in the background. She should know that we're recording. She doesn't see the recording light, but she's going to adapt along with us, I hope. We're also going to see here at this moment in time, we're going to see him be attuned here at this to the postural and body kinematics. Watch how it unfolds. Okay. Hopefully we can hit play here. Okay. When we see those postural and body kinematics change, we see Huntley's movement mechanics change. So Clowney has picked up more speed and Huntley begins to change his behaviors accordingly. Okay. It's not a if this, then that. It's a deep, rich, meaningful exchange of information between Clowney and Huntley here. And Huntley uses it to his advantage to coordinate, control, and organize his behaviors. Okay. Really cool stuff. And that's why we see this deceleration. We see this change of direction in context. Okay. And we have to think about it in that way. Now, as we move on, we start to see some of this nuanced levels and layers to this. Okay. And when we look at it, man, she is really fired up about this squirrel. But in any event, as you guys, I'm sure, can attest to and can tell, what we see, so I apologize for the distraction there, not only for myself and my very non-linear thought processes, but any distraction that she may be offering to you guys. But we see deceleration, we see change of direction in context. And it's why we can't evaluate movement behavior, guys and gals, without looking at the problem that it was organized in relation to solve. But after he gets past this problem, look at already what we find from Huntley here. Look at where his perception, he has moved on. Again, it's that successive nested affordances that he is now accepting and really perceiving and then aiming to accept upon. If this was Lamar Jackson right here, right now, he hits the gas pedal. I promise you, he hits the gas pedal and he heads in a direction right here where this line, okay? We see that this threat of number 96 Elliott here, or anything that is off screen, but there's a lot of space between Tyler Huntley here, or if it were Lamar Jackson in this case, in the next possible threat. Okay. There's a lot of space to eat up, especially on 2nd and 20, even though this being still the line of scrimmage here. So he hasn't even passed by the line of scrimmage to begin gaining yards. But this is a lot of space, a lot of width to operate in, and also a lot of length to operate in as well, or operate within. But we find that he probably is very attuned at this moment, once he gets past this, to the threat presented from 96. But again, this is a defensive lineman now. We know that he is going to present a threat, but it isn't very much of one. Even though if this was Lamar Jackson, 1, 2, 3 steps and he's gone, he's to the sideline. This isn't Lamar Jackson. Perceive to act, act to perceive, action capabilities and effectivity certainly matter, but we have to think about the unfolding context here. 96 squares off to just enough to reorient Huntley back inside back inside the numbers here. But the cool stuff is, as soon as Huntley gets past one threat, one challenge, and here it's in the form of Elliott, and it's in the form of the orientation and the body posture, there's limited affordances for Elliott to act here. Okay. He knows that he can't stay with an athletic quarterback in tight space or in if he gets in the wider space. So he just tries, in my guess, Elliott is just intending to funnel Huntley back into the teeth of the defense so he doesn't get out here, where my mouse is going, where I said that Lamar Jackson probably would get to. And so Elliott does exactly that, knowing this is a difficult endeavor on his part. As soon as he gets to this point, and he being Huntley, when Huntley gets to this point, he is really just perceiving, at least in my opinion, he's perceiving for threats in the form of color. Where are brown and or orange colors, and this sounds really weird, there isn't a lot of research, at least to my belief, especially in the evidence in this form in dynamic team sports like this. But I believe that if we were to look for color, pick up colors, those colors can be informative to how we potentially could act. Okay. We see here as he gets past, he's perceiving, looking for those colors. He sees them and it changes the way that he acts. Now, I know that some people are going to say, like, he is in conscious awareness here of, who he's picking up and what he's picking up. But we can kind of see that as he picks up 97 from the Cleveland Browns and interacting with number 72, his own teammate, this channels, this affordance calls for him. He's got a couple options here, guys and gals. I think that would be pretty obvious if I can get my spotlight out. He's got one here. Like, can he beat number 97 to this spot? And he also has one where he ultimately perceives, selects, and acts upon to go back behind this interaction. Okay, so if we were to look, again, I don't want to belabor this, but I think I want to make it clear. He's got options here to be able to act in a number of different ways depending on what unfolds in front of him. Ultimately, he has to be the one to authentically adapt here. And as he does so, we see that flexible adaptability and adjustability of the control of his actions. He gets out of the way just enough. I know we talk about information-based control. We talk about affordance-based movement control. But in this case, we could also talk to a certain degree about threat-based movement control. And I don't believe that anyone else has really ever highlighted this. It's something I've meditated upon a bunch when we're talking about offensive skill players in traffic. The perception of threat can lead to the coordination, control, and regulation of our movement actions. Okay, let me see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about there, but we just see the adjustment on the fly, get out just enough, veer out to your left, Tyler Huntley, to get out of harm's way there of Cleveland Browns number 97. As he does that, immediately after he does that, guys and gals, I want you to look at what he's perceiving. Watch the head turn. Oops, if I could be better on the mouse, that would be excellent. Let me get back. Emergent analysis here. I'll tell you what. Okay, watch right here. Boom. We already see his head, his chin starting to turn, and watch where his eyes go in relation. His body even begins to turn as if he's going to head up field down the hashes. Sees number 23 right here. I should probably be using the spotlight, but we see number 23 right here. And he knows, and when I say knows, I mean he has a knowledge of where that individual is. And he wants to look to gain an understanding, again, that understanding being very loosely put, a knowledge of this. Do I head here? Do I head somewhere here? Or am I going to have to head back around to bounce this even further to my left? But this enough gets 23, this movement action enough, gets number 23 right here, changing his behaviors ever so slightly. Gets him stopping his feet, a lot of space to operate in, a lot of space right here to operate in. As you guys can see, we don't see another Cleveland Brown in sight besides this one who is engaged in an interaction. So we know that there's a bunch of simultaneous affordances potentially calling for Huntley to come act right here. Okay. But Huntley is constantly perceiving, attempting to pick up and detect what is next. Okay. What is next here? What we find from him is he stays in a metastable zone in a region. What does that mean again? Especially as he comes to this interaction. Again, we guys and gals, I need you guys to pick this up. Look at this back here. If Gibson was correct, and I do believe that he was, when we're talking about expert perceivers and behaviors, those perceivers and that perception gets wider, longer, deeper, richer, or more elaborate. Behavior affords behavior, and we're attempting to pick up those behaviors, but there is nothing out here. Nothing out here. So 23, another threat, another challenge, behavior affords behavior. He becomes the pertinent information source for Huntley at this time. As soon as he looks to his right, down this gap, huge gap, he wants to make sure he takes 23 out of the play. Now, I don't believe that he was consciously thinking about this in his problem solving, but experience and exposure allowed him to be attuned and adaptable around it. Okay. And he does exactly that. Inside out, works 23 here, beats him like a drum, in and out, this shimmy and shake that we're about to see. Once this left foot goes in the ground and we see 23 bite to that, okay, I should have my highlighted mouse, but I don't want you guys to miss this. Watch this, inside out, that left foot strikes the ground. And it's not, again, it's not a if this, then that. So it's not if this guy goes here, he's going there. It's not as simple as that, at least not in my perspective and not in my hypothesis. But this is a constant engagement. Look at this interpersonal distance here. Okay. A metastable region between these two individuals. Huntley is very attuned, very sensitive to staying in this metastable region where he knows that he is able to still go this way or still go that way, and to not only still go left or right, but to do it in a number of different fashions, depending on how number 23 here acts in accordance to him. I know that's something that we've pointed out in a number of cases up to this point, but once he sees that 23 is going here towards Huntley's left, that left foot strikes in the ground, he's going to pop this right back inside. Okay. It's not a stimuli. It's not a cue he's looking for. It's deep, rich, meaningful information that is reciprocally exchanged in this interaction, this dyadic relationship. Okay. And after he does that, just crosses over out of that, gives himself up. At that point, he's decided he's had enough. And I believe that if let's just get back and let's relish in this one more time. And I will say that this right here is very Lamar Jackson like. This is something that we could point to in many previous plays of the week that we've highlighted with Lamar Jackson. This is very Lamar like. In and out, leaves guys standing. At that point, as soon as he gets past 23 and there's no more option for 23 right here, like in this case, I do believe, talking about unique, authentic perceptions and actions, we see that he being Huntley wants to go straight forward. He wants to now accept this gap, and rightfully so. There's a threat here, threat back here. He's got 23 who's going to try to chase from behind. Not much of a threat anymore at this point because of how nicely Huntley left him there. I believe right here, though, at this moment in time, we would have seen, if this were Lamar Jackson, if this were number 8 in this situation, he's going over here. And I know that I am not Lamar Jackson, obviously. I have never been in Lamar Jackson's movement system or in his shoes for that matter, or in his eyes and his decision making. But having watched Lamar Jackson and really studied him in detail, I believe that he would have scanned from right to left here. Okay. He would have scanned over here, saw what was available to him, and we would have saw his head turn this way, and he would have been aiming to continue to adapt. But Huntley decides after 14 yards, he's had enough. He gives himself up, and obviously, like I said earlier, gets the unnecessary roughness penalty on top of that here. Okay, watch right there. Okay. Again, I do believe that at this moment, Lamar Jackson would have looked from right to left and he would have cut and aimed to come back this way. Okay. Even though you got a pursuing 23 here, you got Denzel Ward, one of the more skillful movers in the league at the cornerback position in 21. But if we look at his body angle, we look at his bearing angle as well as his body position and his potential affordances, they're very limited. Lamar Jackson, I'm pretty firm, would have kept adapting. But again, guys and gals, let's remember Lamar Jackson is one of one. So even though we see some tendencies that are similar between Lamar Jackson and Tyler Huntley, we don't see identical nature. There isn't, if you're talking about 1v1 or one of one, excuse me, we must realize and recognize that every player is one of one, right? And we then, therefore, we have to put ourselves in that player's movement system as much as we possibly can. So, what are the qualities? What are the lessons that we can learn here? First of all, adaptability within adaptability. Pretty damn obvious. I know I'm a broken record when I say that, but I think it becomes pretty obvious here on this respective play. We also see attunement to a lot of different potential information sources that would have been highly informative, micro problem to micro problem, that creates that bigger global disposition of the problem. We also see what I would refer to as this threat-based control. Okay, I know that really when we think about affordances, them being opportunities or invitations to act, we also have to think about what are potential affordances that are being decaying because of the way that others are acting, that behavior, affording behavior. So I think the threats and the channeling of those threats are channeling the movement behavior. From a prescription standpoint, learning environment designed to potentially channel this type of movement skill. I know it's going to sound odd because I have kind of been critical of in the past of playing games in the form of tag-based games. I believe for offensive skill players, even though it does have some limitations, the use of tag-based games where we can manipulate number of opponents, teammates, and potential blockers within that tag-based game, where we just have a player within a certain workspace size attempting to get away from all guys, moving from point A to point Z, like we saw in this respective play. The player has full freedom and autonomy to go from left to right, forward, back, wherever it is that he wants to go without being tagged or touched, attempting to move in a ghost-like fashion to the point where you appear and disappear, where you're kind of everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. I think is a way to go about facilitating the emergence of this type of movement skill for all levels of players or performers. Any offensive ball carrier. And then for that matter, on the flip side of that problem solution dynamics would be the defensive players who are attempting to tag. Now, remember, tag-based games do have limitation in the form that you're not tackling somebody, and therefore your behaviors, especially from a defensive player, are going to change at times. Hence the reason the information that one is picking up as an offensive player is reciprocally and mutually going to change as well. But I do believe because we can change the number of players, we can change the workspace size, and we can change the intentions, that players can get awfully attuned and awfully adaptable through that type of game. I know we went really long today, guys and gals. Obviously, we had like 6, 7 local micro movement problems that created this bigger global movement problem. We also saw a bunch of different nuances that I think are important and imperative for us to think about, that Tyler Huntley put on display and express his movement skill really functionally through. Keep asking yourself that question. Do we feel as though Tyler Huntley, those of you who've seen him play in the past, even if you haven't, but you have probably seen Lamar Jackson, do we feel as though Tyler Huntley could, in an observational learning or a modeling type of fashion, by watching Lamar Jackson in certain situations and scenarios, similar problem solving dynamics, do we feel as though they could have emerged and materialized through that observational learning, because I believe that there's something there and a thread that we could continue to pull on. So for Sean Mishka, Football Beyond the Stats, movement play of the week for week 14. If you haven't done so already, please kick the thumbs up like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. If you have thoughts, ideas, and comments, by all means, I'd like to hear them. But I will talk to you guys again in week 15 next week as we head into the holiday season, but we also head into crunch time on the NFL.